Hello everyone. I am Kaniska. Just a small clarification. I am not yet a doctor. I am still a doctoral student at IIT Bombay at Ashank Desai Centre for Policy Studies. And my larger work is on disaster policies, flood policies, and I'm trying to see the relationship between flood policies and vulnerability. And this presentation is based on some of the observation that I had while I was in the field. So the topic is social media and last mile disaster communication. I'm focusing on last mile disaster communication uh, from the perspective of people who are inhabiting hazardscape. And in this case, I'm focusing on an area which is embanked by both the sides with a river known as Kosi River Basin, and that is in Bihar, one of the Indian state. Just to start, uh, a little overview of how social media actually has a lot of impact on our social order and also vice versa. So it is a very ambivalent space in that sense that it has created both a space for expression, democratization of information, as well as it has in some ways also recreated social inequalities and social hierarchies. When it comes to the use of social media in disaster governance, there is a lot of literature that is coming up, and I am just taking example of one overview, like literature overview by Palin and Hughes. They have divided the existing work into different categories, and one important thing that some of the authors have pointed out, and also pointed out by Professor Dan and Dr. Monica, is how the space is collaborative and there is a lot of participation by local people, and there's a lot of decentralization of disaster communication. And there are many new media technology like mobile, text messages, WhatsApp, websites, as well as Twitter, Flickr, TikTok, Instagram. All of them, these platforms are these are some of the social media platforms which are also used in disaster communication. And when it comes to stakeholders, everybody is using social media, from the disaster emergency service managers as well as civil societies, academic institutions, independent knowledge institutions. And like Dr. Monica also pointed out that uh, social media is being used in every phase, from preparedness to prevention to awareness and recovery and reconstruction. So this is just a brief area that I focused on. This is the river, Kosi River Basin, that I'm talking about. And from this is a one screenshot by Google Earth. I'll just zoom in. Yeah. So you can see this is one of the map by Water Resource Department in Bihar. And you can see the red lines. These are two embankments, parallel embankments, and the blue color is where the river is flowing. Interestingly, there are a number of villages which stay here within these different channels of the Kosi River. And I am focusing and my perspective of how social media, how successful it is, or what are the current challenges are coming from, is situated from this perspective. So this is the formal communication flow in Bihar, which includes data from different sources, different organizations. You can see that the violet color boxes, they represent organization and agencies which exist at national level. The blue color one, they exist at the state level. And DMD is the Disaster Management Department, which is the main government department responsible for communicating the warnings and forecasting and everything. So they are the ones who share that data, with citizens through different kind of media. So we have here uh, that is done through, one is website, one is WhatsApp groups, one is Facebook, Twitter. So these are currently, these platforms are being used within formal flood communication in Bihar. Then we see the broken lines, and we see that there are other players which are much more, I would say, crucial in the last mile disaster communication. They involve politician, local representatives, civil society, key community members. And these small circles, these are people, they represent the community members, and different colors denote that they are people from different caste, class, gender, and spatial location. And they're also a bit distant from people who are directly getting that information through social media and other platforms. So I've kind of divided it into two frames. You can see one is red and one is gray, and there is certain overlap where I'm focusing on the social media platforms. So the red one is much more structured kind of communication, and every year these departments know what kind of data has to be collected, what kind of data has to be disseminated, where it has to go, and it is also more technical and expert driven. While when we come to the gray part of it, it is much more uh, it's less structured, more informal, through social networks, social capital, and through friends and neighborhood. So this is the space where most of the, let's say, data loss or interpretation loss that occurs. Okay, so when we zoom into the nature of data or information that is being shared, first is the when you look at the disaster governance in Bihar, it is a round the year data dissemination and production. And that caters to different kind of disaster, including floods, lightning, earthquake, cold waves, heat waves. And the data is also segregated on the basis of state, district, and also river basin data. Most of the data is technical in nature, that is created by the state and national agencies, and it is in the form of hydrographs of river or spatial maps and digital elevation maps. And then we have early morning and flood forecasting. One interesting thing about the data that is shared is it is also color coded, which I think it is one of the strong point, because uh, even if you don't, let's say, understand the language of it, then the color association of something with color can help people from villages to interpret that data. They're also coming up with a lot of mobile application. One is Vajrapat, which is a Hindi term, and it is literally translated into lightning. So this is one of the mobile application that Bihar state has worked on, and they're also looking forward to expanding it to other disasters. But there is an entire politics that is involved when we talk about what data, what information is translated or is interpreted as warning. And that I'm not going to talk about it in detail, but I am calling it the politics of risk recognition. So what becomes a risk, how some sort of risk is evaluated, and what hazard becomes, a potential source of risk. Is There's a lot of politics that is involved there, which needs to be unfolded if we want to understand the last mile disaster communication also. So this is one map. This is a state level map, and different districts. You can see the color codes here. No warning for green, yellow for you have to be careful, and dark yellow for more you have to be alert. So this is the kind of data that the Twitter handles by disaster management department, or other agency like Bihar Mausam Kendra. They share it on their Twitter and Facebook profiles. This is again one of the warnings, which is both in English and Hindi. And the Hindi, writing it in Hindi makes it uh, more accessible for many people, although there is still a problem, because these regions that I am working on, my research side, they do not, most of them might not be able to read Hindi, because their dialect is bit different, the language is different. So but this has opened some space of more interpretation and more accessibility, but there is a lot that still needs to be done. Again, this is another kind of uh, uh, data information that is shared on website by water resource department. And you can see that there is danger level, warning level, observed water, high flood level. And so these data are primarily in number. And these numbers sometimes they do not, there's a lot of interpretation issues from the side of people, because they might associate different risk perception related to this number, or at some level they might not even be able to interpret it. But social media, interestingly, is also used by local people who through WhatsApp, let's say through WhatsApp platform. So one of the organization, local people's organization, Kosi Nirman Manch, that I was associated with during my field work, they have made a flood response group on WhatsApp, and the data that comes from upstream Kosi Barrage, it is shared there with local people, and it's basically the data is in cubic, how much water is being discharged from the barrage, so that people there downstream, they prepare themselves if they want to relocate, if they want to relocate their houses, if they want to dismantle their house and then shift to some other place. So that is one place that has been created by the social media platform, new media technologies. Another thing that is that actually caught my attention is the politics of recognition of risk that I mentioned. So in 2021, I saw that there was a lot of contestation that happened between state actors, governance actors, and between people who were saying, okay, we had floods this time, while the state said, no, we did not have flood because we did not discharge as much water as is required for it to be called a danger, or it to be called a risk. So as a response to it, now Kosi Nirman Manch, along with the local people, they are gathering more time-stamped and geotag photographs of loss, of inundation, so that for further, let's say, if there is some legal recourse that is needed. So this is a very interesting use of social media that I have observed on my field. And also it is interesting because these are the peoples who are disaster victims, as well as they are the first responders. They are the ones who are arranging for boats and arranging for different kind of social support to rehabilitate or to temporarily move to a better place, higher place. And there is also an element of authenticity that is involved, because the reporting is being done from ground. So one of the authors, he talks about Dufty, he talks about how social media can be a very potent tool in making communities resilience, in increasing their capacity to cope, in increasing their capacity to prepare. However, there are issues, and I'm going to talk about it now. So one is at the level of interpretation. Like I always already mentioned, that when it comes to these numerical data, it is very hard, or it's very hard for local people to interpret it in the same way that the state is interpreting that data, and they are just sharing the information. So we can't really for sure say that they will be they are receiving the same kind of information that the state is trying to say. And in many cases, the state authorities are off the point in interpreting risk, which is more closely observed by people at the ground. So there's another case by from Kerala floods 2018, where uh, these people, they lived in lowlands, and their houses were inundated every year. So it's a in both my area, that Kosi floodplain, and also in Kerala flood 2018. I worked there in a Kuttanad region. So there was a lot of warning that went from state side, stating, okay, you have to relocate, you have to move out from your houses because it is raining continuously. But people were so used to living with floods and their previous experiences of early years, that they did not believe that warning. And so what we found was, there is a level of trustworthiness between state and people relationship, and especially if people are more familiar with the context of hazards, like in my case, in my research site, and also in Kerala. So then these information are slightly, it comes in a very contentious zone, and its interpretation actually poses a lot of problem. And in that very process, there is a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty that comes into play when you're talking about these numerical and technical data. So what are some of the factors which is actually shaping last mile communication? The area that I just showed in the map, so that area, it erodes every year. So there is a substantial, and because the river, that the Kosi River, it meanders a lot. So and it also has a lot of branched um, she flows in a more branched pattern. So maybe one year she'd be flowing from some of her branches would be flowing in one direction. In the other year, it would change its course. So that results in multiple erosion and relocation for people, which makes it really difficult to uh, build energy sources. So that area is one example where we can say that people are energy poor. They generally rely on panels, which might not work during the season of, let's say, floods, or when there is no sun. And that leads to certain, what Professor Dan also said, a digital divide. So accessibility to these digital infrastructure becomes extremely challenging in this case. Second part is the literacy part of it. So this region, general literacy is very low, especially for women, and that again poses a lot of challenges for how the data is interpreted, how it is received, how much of that is put into use. Then I already talked about how the existing trust on the sender, like state, and these area, they have a history of state citizen relationship in the context of floods. So the trustworthiness on state actors, it poses a very big, it's a big impediment in the last mile communication of uh, uh, disaster warnings, and through, especially through social media. Then we have local indigenous knowledge system, which is trying to make sense of risk perception. There are some existing fault lines which needs to be pointed out and also needs to be attended to, for social media to also become one one tool used by the state to disseminate the information as widely as possible, and for it to be interpreted properly. First is, from this is also an observation from my field, that there is a growing reliance on the social media platform, and it is being we are literally moving to a place where the lot of traditional form of communication is being replaced by social media communication, which is a problem for the very same reason that those factors uh, which are shaping the last mile communication. People might not have data, access to digital infrastructure. They might not have the literacy level, digital literacy, to interpret that data. So that is one form. So this is something that I want to flag. Then second one is, there is a gendered, for gender texture to social media data dissemination. So this, at my research site, there are very few women who have access to smartphones, smart mobiles. Either it is their husbands, their sons, that they are getting this information from. And this area has a history of migration, men migration, adolescent boys migration. So in that case, because women sometimes, or most of the times, they are the first responders, and they are not the ones who are getting the message. And it makes the entire process of social media dissemination of information a very gendered exercise. And related to this is what we call the uneven distribution of bonding. So these are some of the factors which I feel is becoming a major challenge while we are talking about social media for effective communication of disaster. So what are the some of the ways, some of the things that we can imagine, or that we should really be careful, or we should be taking in consideration while we imagine a world where social media has become an important tool or important platform for dissemination of information. One is, there has to be some sort of local adaptation to the state of the art communication technology. So until and unless that is very well received, very well understood, it would not reach the people who are actually at the risk of disasters, the vulnerable people, and also the disaster victims. Second one is digital literacy and access to infrastructures that has to be taken in consideration while we are planning, while the state goes on and uh, does some sort of blanket uh, policy for expanding social media within disaster communication. Then we have there needs to be more visual data that has to be integrated within social media, and also the government has to be very careful about the local dialects, because Hindi and English, even the bilingual um, dissemination, it does not really sit well for people who do not understand either of the languages. Then we have to be really careful about letting social media be the only way of disaster communication. It has to be one of the mediums of many mediums, and we have to revive, and uh, we have to support the traditional sources of disaster communication. And lastly, which is more at a very epistemological level, is that how local people interpret data, how local people understand risk, how do they experience disaster, that, and how do they forecast, what are their ways of indigenous technologies of understanding about rainfall, about water, about the changing color of water. If all these factors, or if all the local epistemologies and ontologies are also included within the state of the art communication technology that is disseminated by state, I think it would cater to a more uneven. It would try and challenge the uneven distribution of warning, and also uneven um, interpretation of that warning. So yeah, so integrating local forecasting method and epistemologies of interpreting dangers and risk is something that we have to be really considerate about. Thank you.